Because people think turning the other cheek is tolerance. No, you're just not facing. Not facing is not tolerance. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Welcome to Spiritual Sense. Hello, Shireen.
Hello, Michael.
So today we're diving into something very important for many spiritual people like us: how to not be a pushover, how to not be a doormat. Are you somebody who likes to please others, who doesn't like conflict, who wants to be at peace and tolerate and just put up with things and doesn't want to have any drama with anyone and doesn't want to be seen as too aggressive or too assertive, and as a result of that perhaps you are being taken advantage of and your needs aren't being met? So if this sounds a bit like you, and it sounds a bit like me in some contexts, I'll be honest, that is what we're diving into today. How to not be a doormat, how to get what you want, and how spirituality relates to all of these fascinating things. So hello Shireen, how are you doing?
Wonderful, wonderful.
We're very lucky to have Shireen because she is an example of someone who doesn't let people take advantage of her and is a very spiritual person.
Take that as a blessing.
I'll take that as a blessing. That is a blessing. It's because many spiritual people, we have all these things in our head about, you know, if someone does something, give them the other cheek. If they hit you one face, show them the other side, and tolerate and put up with things and all of this stuff, right? There's so many different messages, and we can misinterpret all of those things and end up in a situation where people are taking advantage of us, ruining our life, and we end up with low self-esteem, low self-respect, lack of dignity, and end up in a real mess. So we're going to be talking about how to overcome this. So why don't we start with a simultaneous breath with you, Shireen? Would you like to do a little practice with us?
All right, let's take a deep breath in and hold that breath, and then just release it slowly. Take another deep breath in, hold it, and release it gently. One last time. Take a deep breath in, hold it, and release it gently. There you go.
Isn't that wonderful? So let's start with the signs that you might be a doormat. Just so we can see, does this apply to you? And this has definitely applied to me. And we also have to remember as we get into this that we have different compartments within us. So we might not be a doormat in some areas of our life, and we might completely be a doormat in other areas, right? So just tune into this. Does it apply to you in any area of your life? So here are the signs. Number one, do you compromise with other people? Are you looking for compromises where you're not going along with things? Oh, I'll do this if you do that, and it ends up not really getting what you need. They're not getting what they need. Do you compromise? Second sign is, do you dislike conflict? Are you conflict adverse? Do you hold yourself back to avoid people being jealous of you or their reaction? Are you a nice person? Are you very nice and want to be seen as a nice person?
They're two different things. No? Are you a nice person and want to be seen as nice?
All right. Do you want to be...
your self-image is, I want people to think I'm a nice person.
Do you feel somewhat trapped or unhappy, kind of stuck in a situation? Are you discontent with yourself? And do you feel like you're in a invisible cage? This is very subtle. Do you feel like you're sort of in a cage where you can't get out, but it's a golden cage? You're kind of comfortable, but you're trapped at the same time. This is a very deep thing.
I know, right? Many times you don't know you're in it.
That's right. So being a doormat is basically being in a golden cage of some sort. And if you said yes to any of those things, then you are a little bit of a doormat, and we're going to talk about how to get out of it. So before we do this, first of all, Shireen, is it spiritual to be a doormat, to turn the other cheek, to tolerate things, to people please? Is all this spiritual behavior really and truly? Because it seems like it is in some cases. It certainly can be interpreted that way.
Right. I mean, you don't go in thinking, oh, is it spiritual to be a doormat, right? You go in thinking, I'm tolerating. You go in thinking, I am, it's nice to give in to people. I don't want conflict. You don't think, oh, I'm being a doormat. You don't think that. So you think that you're being, just being nice and getting along with people, and you're wanting to move things along. You don't want to upset the status quo because someone told you, oh, it's good to tolerate. It depends on the context, right? It depends on the context. But let's say for most people, 99% of the people in the world, the problem is not whether they're tolerating. The problem is, are they facing the fact that why they are willing to be in a relationship with anyone? It could be work, it could be a personal relationship. Why they are willing to be in a relationship where they are not facing their insecurities, they are not facing their problems, and they just want to avoid conflict at all cost. They feel that tolerance is the best way to be, but they're not facing something, right? Tolerance, or this willingness to put up with things, is actually a power. It's a balance power. The balance has to be you face. So if you don't face and you're just putting up with things, then you're not balancing it out, right? Think of an old-fashioned scale. And in that old-fashioned scale, there's in those outside courthouses and stuff, there's this lady with justice with old-fashioned scales. So you have to have both equal amount, then it's balanced. You have to have tolerance and you have to have the power to face. One is not more important than the other. Both have to be equally balanced. But most of the time, if I feel I'm tolerating, if I feel I'm being taken advantage of, then the tolerance part of the scale is heavier than the face part of the scale. And so we have to learn to face. So is it spiritual? It's not spiritual not to balance, right? I'm not saying tolerance is a bad thing. It's not spiritual not to balance. Live a balanced life is spiritual. You have to face equally as you tolerate.
So if someone is, in an abusive relationship, on one hand, they need to tolerate to some degree, right? I mean, especially in the moment when something's happening. But they also need to face the fact that they are in a toxic relationship that has to be upgraded, or maybe it might be at work.
Right. It depends on the kind of abuse, no? If it's, let's say, physical abuse, it's emotional, very extreme emotional abuse and all of that. You need to not tolerate in the moment also. You have to face your insecurities. You have to face why you are in this relationship and really get out, especially if it's a physically abusive relationship, an emotionally abusive relationship too. There's no space for tolerance in such relationships, actually.
I think a lot of this that we're told in various spiritual teachings, to tolerate, to give the other cheek, to put up with things, to be seen as a nice person, it can be used against ourselves. And people can take advantage of us. They can say, oh, this person's so nice, they're so sweet, they put up with things, they're so patient. And then they just can go on and on.
Mostly it's not because of all of those things, Michael. Mostly it's because of our deep insecurities, deep desperation, that somehow something is in the soul that they feel this other person is giving, that you cannot get anywhere else, that you do that. It's not because you think, oh, this is nice to do, it's a spiritual thing to do. Most of the time, right, the underlying reason why people do that is because of some deep insecurities, deep fears. You know, the biggest fear is in any being, in any soul, right? The biggest fear is fear of endings. They have big fear of ending of relationships. I don't know why, because they're not really happy in the relationship, but they have fear of ending of relationship. And you have to face that. You have to go close and think whatever it is that is happening, especially if it's physical abuse, right? Whatever is happening is not going to be worse. The worst thing that can happen to you is this physical abuse. Facing it, ending it is so much better.
So someone might think they're tolerating and all these things, but really what's going on a deeper level is they are afraid of losing something and willing to put up with things because of fear
Yes, and it's
of
a
loss.
false belief, actually, because they've lost already. They've lost a lot, actually, already.
Right. I mean, the most
for
extreme example is physical abuse. You know, I mean, I've heard this from many people who, that like, the husband or whoever is beating them up and, you know, doing all these things, and they say, "Oh, but he's so nice, really, and he's just having a rough day, and, you know, he just drinks too much." But really, what's happening is the fear of loss, isn't it? What would happen, and maybe fear of the unknown, fear of not being willing to.
Fear of the unknown, fear of endings. Fear of endings is a big fear, right? You have to face it. You have to just go in and face it. There's nothing that's going to happen to you. You have the capacity, you have the resilience to bounce back. We all have the capacity. Inherently, we all have the capacity to bounce back and not to have this fear of endings.
So, in order to overcome this fear of endings, we need to have an idea of what we want and expand our consciousness beyond the situation. Because if someone only sees that situation, they can't imagine something else, something better, then they're going to be terrified, right? So we obviously need to expand out. How does that happen?
One of the ways is you have to see yourself in your dignity. You have to see yourself in your self-respect. You have to see yourself as a being worthy of love, as being worthy of receiving everything. You have to see yourself as worthy. You have to see yourself complete, right? Don't see yourself through the lens of someone else. See yourself through the lens of God, who will always see you as a beautiful, radiant being, always. That's God's vision for you. And so just keep seeing the way God would see you, as a beautiful, radiant being. And whatever it is that God has your back, right? Like, you can always depend on the Supreme Source for love and peace, even though you feel, oh, it's difficult, it's not present here physically, all of those things, right? Just try it a little bit. You know, you just need to overcome this little inertia towards having this relationship. Because what happens is, when you don't face, and you think whatever you're doing is tolerance, really it's not tolerance, it's just lack of power to face. Because tolerance as a power is a different power. Lack of facing is not tolerance, right? And so you have to understand your worth independent of that relationship. If you understand your worth independent of that relationship, you will realize that tolerance is something else other than not facing. Because people think turning the other cheek is tolerance. No, you're just not facing. Not facing is not tolerance. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I suppose these are balanced things. I imagine most people haven't thought about this, that there are these two things. It's normally thinking that I'm putting up with stuff and that's so wonderful, shows what a great person I am. But what you're saying is that there's actually a major problem here that needs to be looked at directly, and underlying issues going on that have to be addressed, and that's the actual issue at hand. It's nothing. We're kind of using spiritual ideas to justify lack of facing and changing, really.
Lack of facing our fears, our insecurities. We are hiding behind these spiritual concepts. And so what happens is actually tolerance itself, right? Let's double click on tolerance. So tolerance is a power, and it's a love power. It's a power that really harnesses the power of love, right? And so tolerance and love, right? We need to understand love. So love is where there is no selfish motive. It's very pure. There's no attachment in it. There is no fear involved in it. There's none of that stuff going on. And then, but we take like really a version of love, a very diluted version of love. And we say, oh, but that is tolerance, right? Like, let's say the diluted version is I have expectations, I have selfish motives, I have fears, I have insecurities, and I'm hanging on and saying, oh, I'm hanging on because I love, because I'm tolerating. But that's not the reason why. Because tolerance really is a very high level of love, where there is none of that stuff, right? It's a very pure form of love. It's a power. And that power, that pure power of love, really is when you tolerate in that, then there is no feeling of, you know exactly, in that form of love, you know exactly when to face, when to tolerate, when to give, when to have this boundaries set. You know exactly all of these things. So what you're doing is actually you're not facing, because love power, like the power of love, the power of tolerance is very high. It's a high power.
So, before we get into what someone could do is in a situation, the way they need to get out of, you're talking about tolerance, right? What do you mean is a good example of tolerance then?
Like a mother tolerating a child, right? I remember when one of my nephews was little and he was crying a lot. And I was like, oh my God, shut this kid up, right? And my sister is like, oh, so sweet, so lovely, in the middle of the night, get up, do whatever it takes to bring that, to, make sure the child is okay. And so that is really a very pure form of tolerance, which is very selfless, which is really just giving, right? It's coming from a very pure place of love. But most of the time in adult relationships, when we say that's like the mother and a child, right? The baby was a few months old. The mother and a child, but most of the time in adult relationships, they don't need that. They need love and law. You need to lay down boundaries, because you're not laying down boundaries because you're afraid something will happen in the relationship. You're afraid of conflict. You're afraid what they'll say, what they'll do. You're afraid you have to put up with a lot of nagging and a lot of, cold shoulders and stalling and all of those things. So you're afraid of that. And so you say, okay, then I won't lay down the law. But as an adult, you need to lay down boundaries.
So this is a very deep thing, right? So what seems to be going on here is that all of us in one way or another are in relationships with different people in our life, right? And some of those relationships are not healthy, and some of them we haven't thought about these things very much. Like, it's the unconscious. We end up in situations a lot of the time without really knowing what we're doing initially. And there's all sorts of different relationships with friends and family and whatever else, right? And business and all the rest of it. And then we can tolerate in the wrong way, put up with things because we're afraid of conflict, we're afraid of speaking up. I think a lot of it, honestly, is we might not know what we want and what we need in the first place. So, because I think a lot of times we just end up in situations not quite sure how we got there. And
right.
And it's like, to get what you want, you need to know what you want. Right. So I think that's probably why a lot of this happens on some level, is that we just muddle our way through things and end up in a situation and go, I don't know what's going on. I'll just compromise and tolerate a little bit and do these things. And it gradually gets worse and becomes this real mess. So it seems like we need to actually have an idea of what we want, and then we can gauge whether or not this thing is getting me what I want in the first place,
Many times we are afraid of even voicing what we want. And even if we voice it, right, and we don't get it the first time, we don't get it the second time, we are so afraid. that they'll leave and, it'll end and whatever, right? It's very unconscious. This is very unconscious. Like, people can be totally fine in other areas, but in some areas like this, they are very unconsciously being doormats.
So this is, I mean, just talking about this, I feel myself sort of going slightly unconscious in a sense, because like we're looking at things that we're not normally looking at and seeing all these underlying issues that are happening all at the same time. And in order to get out of it, we need to be able to know what we want very clearly and take the time to think about, what do I want for my life? What's important to me? What sort of relationship do I actually want to have with various people in different contexts?
And love, self-love also.
Yeah. So it seems like there's no possibility of really moving beyond these situations if we don't know what we want in the first place.
And we learn to think of ourselves as worthy. We learn to take love from God. We learn to have self-love. All of that, we take care of ourselves. We protect our dignity.
Mm-hmm. You want to talk about that? Dignity, self-dignity? What does that mean?
I always tell people protecting your dignity is the number one priority in your life. You have to protect your dignity at all costs. Don't allow anyone to step over your dignity. Don't allow anyone to disrespect you. Don't allow anyone to diss you, Like, this, what you want is not, it doesn't matter. You are allowing it. Even though the other person is doing it, we are adults here. You're allowing it, right? And so what happens is, recently someone came to the center, young girl in her 30s. She has a, little grown child, and then she recently had a baby. And then now the husband is telling this young lady, you're spending too much time with the baby, few months old, right? You're spending too much time with the baby. I'm not getting any, any attention from you. So we should end this relationship. And this soul was almost willing to do anything to get the husband back and all of that. And I'm thinking, but it's his child too, right? It's his child too. Like, why are you not chipping in to help with the child? Basically, what you're telling me is that you have 3 children. You have 2, and there's one adult who wants to be treated as a child. And is willing to really compromise on her dignity, really willing to give up her dignity to be in the relationship. And that kind of sacrifice, when you sacrifice your dignity to be in relationships, right? You think it's free. You think nothing's going to happen. I'll just give up my dignity. But the beating that your dignity gets in the long run is irreplaceable. You can't walk that back. It takes a really long time to walk back the loss of your dignity. So you have to protect your dignity at all costs. If someone doesn't want to be with you, someone is acting weird, someone is doing all of these things, right? See your dignity, see what's happening with your dignity, look at it, and step away. Because that kind of loss of dignity, when you let it go, it's very hard to get it back. It takes years to get it back.
This is a very deep thing. I'm thinking of situations in my own life where I did know what I wanted, and then I wasn't getting what I wanted in terms of the relationship, the camaraderie, the kind of cooperation in a relationship. And I remember thinking, this is probably a lot of unconscious stuff at the time. I need to tolerate, I need to put up with this. But what was really going on a deeper level is I didn't want to address the fact that I actually needed to end the relationship, because that has a lot of consequences. I think that what it comes down to is laziness and fear, really, that we're not getting our needs met, and we have 2 choices. One is to just accept it and say, okay, this is what it is, what can I do? And the other is to say, I'm going to break out of this deal with quite a large number of consequences that comes with that, which is oftentimes expensive and complicated, and go into the unknown.
But it's cheaper than losing your dignity.
Well, it certainly seems...
Don't think that the consequences are so much. Don't think that. Losing your dignity is the highest consequence. In any relationship, that's the highest consequence. That no amount of money and no amount of work can replace that.
Well, I don't think most people think about that at the time, which is like good you're bringing this up. But this is something that I don't imagine most people are like, it's top of mind. Because in someone's mind, what it seems like is there's massive amount of work to be done here. I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm just saying that that's why this goes on and on and on. So that's been my personal experience is I think, well, you know, I can put up with this thing temporarily because hopefully it'll get better, and it's easier. It's easier than
that's the
ending.
biggest joke of the century.
It is a big joke, but this is like the point of these podcasts is like I was thinking of having a section called like the real deal, right? We can have like a banner, the real deal, because the real deal is these are all wonderful concepts, but when it comes to the actual situation in the mind, it seems like there's a massive amount of time, work, and energy involved. Like I'll give an example in my company, right? I work with people, and I work with people for years and years and years. I might think to myself, well, this person's not exactly the ideal person for these various reasons. So I've got two choices. One is to say, oh, well, you know, they do mostly things well, which I'm happy about, and they don't do these things well. And that's fair enough, right? That's the easy method. The harder method is to say, let me fire them and rehire someone else, which may not work out either and is enormous amount of time, money, and energy and stress and all the rest of it. And so there's this payoff going on in the mind. I don't know whether the future is going to be better than the present, but I definitely know it's going to be a lot of work. Whereas this situation is sort of working in some areas and not in other areas.
What I've noticed, though, Michael, in any situation like that, no?
Mm-hmm.
The relationship is on its way out. You're just postponing the inevitable. It always ends.
Yeah,
That's what I've noticed.
I think
I'm not saying go end your relationship. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just watching as a neutral, detached observer of relationships, and I'm just telling you, protect your dignity at all costs. If you're afraid a relationship is going to end, means it's going to end.
Yeah, and I suppose the sign of a good relationship is where you can speak honestly and heartfully with the other person, and they respect what you're saying, and they will, you know, act accordingly so that the dignity is maintained. So if there's because no one's perfect, and there's sometimes issues come up no matter how good the relationship is, but if we can say to somebody, this is what I need, this isn't working out, we need to change this, and the other person says, okay, sure, you know, that sounds good, it's a win-win, that's a healthy
then
situation.
they're really respecting you. They
Yeah.
want to be in this, right? If they're not giving in and they're not doing any of that stuff, and they're just doing whatever, and you're losing your dignity, let me tell you, the writing's on the wall on that one.
That's a good point. It's a bit like, I like this expression, win-win situation. Is it a win-win? Are both people, because we're talking mostly about relationships, are both people happy about this situation and both winning? And if the answer is yes, then it's great. And if one person's sort of not sure about it and they don't really want to be there, they're not in blah, 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 and this and that, and negative comments and all the rest of it, like you said, it's a sign it's going to end anyway, so it might as well just be cleared out.
Right. You know, it's going to end anyway. So this is something you have to remember. There's sunk cost, right? It's going to end anyway, right? It's going to end anyway. At least end it with your dignity intact, right? Protect your dignity at all costs. All costs. You have to protect your dignity. No one else will come to it. It's the most important thing you can do in your life, because it doesn't come cheap. You can't just give it away to people. I'm telling you because I care about you, right? Because I care about people. I'm not saying it because I want you to go break up with people. I'm not saying that. But make sure that your needs are met and your dignity is protected.
That's a very deep thing. So the way to protect dignity is to know what you want and not be willing to put up with anything and get out of it.
Don't let people disrespect you. Don't let people disrespect you.
And if they are disrespecting you, what are you supposed to do about it?
Call them out on it. Right? Talk about it. Talk to yourself about it. You're worthy. Like, disrespect also comes very subtly, right? Like roll of the eyes, they don't want to talk to you, they don't want to be around you. A lot of ways disrespect comes. They don't want to have a conversation about what's going on. That is disrespect.
That's a classic sign. If you sit down and say, okay, there's obviously some issues here, can we talk about them and work them out? And the other person stonewalls you, or they don't want to talk, or they put you off, or they keep saying later, and they're never around. That's massive disrespect. That's passive aggressive. A lot of the time, it's passive aggressive disrespect.
Aggressive, yeah. I'd rather take the aggressive kind than the passive aggressive.
At least when people would directly diss you and call you names and call you out, that's like direct disrespect. Okay, fair enough. But passive aggressive is like they're really being toxic, but they're not saying anything about it directly. It's
very deceiving. You don't think anything is happening.
It's like lack of doing something can be just as toxic as doing something, but it's not as obvious. It seems to me, just this conversation, ultimately, if you want to be in a good situation and get what you want, you have to be around the right people. That's what it comes down to. And a friend of mine many years ago, he was saying, if there's a situation that's not working out and you can feel it, and you have a feeling that it's ultimately going to end, why don't you just get on with it and get it over and done with? Just get it done now, because what's the point?
Totally after my heart, whoever said that.
Yeah, it's the long pain or the short pain. If you know this is the end result, then just get it taken care of. Like, what is the point in just dilly-dallying around this for months and years? I remember doing this with someone I was working with.
Yeah, not only you dilly-dallying it, you think it's just cheap, right? You think, the consequences are too much, kids are involved, whatever, right? Many times we have all of these things going on in our head. But what I'm saying is you're paying with your dignity, which is so expensive. It's the most valuable commodity in your life.
What a wonder. And it's very toxic on our heart, very hard. I remember I was in a situation in my work where someone was not respecting my opinion, and I was putting up with all sorts of things, and I was thinking, but I can't let this person go because blah blah blah, and all the knowledge and sunk costs and all the rest of it. And I finally said, that's it, we're done. And I felt great afterwards, and it wasn't actually a big deal, but should have really done that a long time ago. And I'm glad that I did it. Finally, I just got it taken care of, and it was actually 100 times less of a problem than I imagined in my head. So what we're talking about is really, how do we get in good situations? Like, what is the sign of a good, healthy, dignified relationship? What sort of people do we want to be around? What are the qualifications of quality people?
People who really care about you, people who have good wishes for you, people who love to see you succeed, people who support you, people who, all of that. Those are the kinds of people you want to be around. And they are like that. They are people like that. We get into very negative patterns of going after people, like the same kind of people in our lives, right? Like we have a very negative pattern, like what we have seen in our childhood, we tend to repeat in our adult life. So it's a very negative pattern we are going into. But this is very important, to sit down and write what's important to you, right? Irrespective of whether you're in a relationship, whether you want to get out of it, don't want to get out of it, write what's important to you. That a relationship has to be that they have to cooperate, they have to have good wishes for you, they have to love to see you succeed, they have to, have respect for you, all of those things. Willing to talk.
So you write a list of what you want. I find that really helpful. If we don't know what we want and we haven't thought about this, then we just take whatever comes, and there's a lot more bad things bad opportunities and weird situations than there are good ones. So
we have to be very clear what we want. Very clear, right? Just write it down. It's the beginning of the year. You can just write these down and say, I'm going to manifest this by the end of the year, and you will.
That's very powerful. So write it down and refer back to it. So, you know, these are the situations that I want. These are the sort of people I want to work with, want to live with, want to be with, want to connect with, friends I want. And then you can say, okay, do my current situations match up to this or not? And if not, then it might be better to find other people who are genuinely into it, who are happy about this. Because high-level people like other high-level people. That's, it's a mutual love and appreciation. And unfortunately in life, and I'm sure many people listening to this have heard this before, that when you become more successful in any area of your life, a lot of other people just fall away. And there's a lot of room at the top, so to speak, because not many people want to play at that level. There's hardly anyone there. I mean, there's just hardly anyone there. And so anyone who is wanting to go to a higher level, they want to connect with other people like that because there's not many of them around, actually. So, whereas on the other hand, there's massive amounts of people who are just complaining and blaming and making excuses and putting up with all sorts of stuff, and that's not the sort of life that's very inspiring.
Right. Wherever you are, just surround yourself by people who will love to see you succeed.
So writing down what you want, getting clear, and being willing to say no. And I think it just brings a lot of peace of mind to realize that toxic situations are going to end anyway, so why not get it over and done with?
Right.
So this has been a fascinating conversation. Did anyone know that dignity was the most important thing in life? This is a new concept for most people. Protecting our dignity. And it's not really spiritual just to be putting up with nonsense all the time, at all. It's a sign of...
it's not. You're just giving it as an excuse, though. You know, there's always a dynamic, right? When you're in a relationship, it's a dynamic. What are you doing in this dynamic? Don't worry about this other person. What are you doing? Let's get that going, right? You stop doing whatever you're doing in that dynamic, this part will fall off.
That's right.
Or they will step up.
Yeah.
Or they will step up. But if you keep saying, oh, this one should do, then you're not taking responsibility for what you're supposed to do.
That's right. There's a wonderful quote, I can't remember who said it, that when you change, the way people used to manipulate you no longer works. And they don't like it. So that's what happens. We act differently, and the other person freaks out, and everyone goes, oh, what happened to this person? You know, and everyone has to sort of readjust to this new dynamic. So the reality of this situation is that if you do these things that we're talking about, you'll end up in a much, much better situation in the future. And in the meantime, there will be some level of discomfort and chaos to some degree, and we might as well be honest about that, because it is going to happen, right? And that's the price we have to pay in order to get our dignity back and sort our lives out. Shireen, how do they deal with that?
How do they deal with what?
The chaos.
Oh, the chaos. Just live through it. Just breathe deeply. Just live through it. And I always tell people, see yourself the way God would see you, not this popular version of God where he's punishing and having a little black book and writing your mistakes, not that one. The ocean of love, right? The actual one who's the ocean of love, who doesn't play favorites, doesn't do any of that stuff, the actual one. So that one, there's only one, that source of love is so loving that I cannot imagine my life without that source, where I'm seeing myself through his eyes, through the vision that he has for me, through the dream he has for me. And I have to keep seeing myself through that. There's this highest vision, just like you would see like the most precious child. That's the way God sees us. And so you have to see yourself that way. If you start seeing yourself that way, then automatically everything will fall into place. But first start seeing yourself that way. That's the thing I would recommend everyone is remember you're a spiritual being and have a vision of yourself the way God would vision you. The ocean of love would vision you.
Ah, that's so beautiful. So let's just finish with a little recap on if you want to get what you want, then first of all, know what you want, write it down so you don't forget, and rewrite it or have it somewhere to look at, because without that, everything is a bit random. And then look at your life and say, okay, does it match up? Do the people in your life match up with what you want? And if not, then just deal with the fact that there are sunk costs, this sunk costs issue. I bet I've been with this person for 20 years, I can't just, no. If it's not working out and it's not going to work out, you might as well just get it over and done with, because it's going to happen anyway. And then that's going to open up to new people who are actually inspiring and want to be with you and are more interested in connecting and on the level you want to connect. And be willing to go through the fire temporarily to, it's like crossing a flaming bridge, really, isn't it? You know, across the abyss. But you will get to the other side.
It's not as bad as you're making it out to be, really. It's not. It's a little uncomfortable. It's not as uncomfortable as people make it out to be. We have the capacity to withstand anything that life throws at us. We all have an inherent psychological immune system that protects us. It is there, right? That's what recent research has shown, that we have all a psychological immune system. We have the capacity to synthesize happiness out of everything. Don't be afraid. There's nothing uncomfortable. Maybe a little bit, just a little bit, and just walk through that. Just that little bit.
Slight discomfort.
It's not as bad as you think it's going to be.
No. I think it's just worth talking about these things a little bit, because at the back of the mind, there's this thing, but something. But if we just deal with it directly, it's not. I remember when I started doing meditation, I stopped hanging out with my old friends and going out drinking all, on the weekend. And I remember I didn't really think about it that much at the time, but I was like getting away from something that was bad for me, and I started doing meditation. And there was some level of weird feeling when I saw my old friends, like, what happened to you? Like, where have you been? There was a little bit of thing, but actually I met all these new people and my whole life got better and everything got better and better and better. And so there is this whole new world that opens up, and we're only going to get there when we're open to move forward. So this is going to be a wonderful opportunity to meet new people who you don't know yet. I remember one time, I'll just finish on this story. I was in England and I was not very happy with a certain situation that I was dealing with. And I was in the car and there's a red light and it turned green, and I went forward and then I turned the corner down to the road where I lived. And just as I turned the corner, I had this awareness, I am going to meet loads of wonderful people who I don't know yet in another country. And I just remember turning the corner thinking, that's just fascinating. There are all these wonderful people, and I didn't know who they were or where they were or anything about it, but I just had that feeling. And since then I have met a lot of wonderful people who I didn't know at that time. So there are all these wonderful people who would love to meet you in your life who don't exist yet, but you're going to find them when you take action and move forward. Yay. So thank you so much, Shireen. And
Thank you, Michael. Always a pleasure.
Want to read us a blessing?
Blessing. Okay, this is for all of you.
Special blessing?
Adaptability.
Wow.
Your ability to adjust brings you joy. Adaptability is your badge of honor. You embrace new experiences with enthusiasm. You bravely navigate life's unpredictable turns. Possibilities are limitless. This freedom is now who you are.
Thank you. That's beautiful. So lots of love to everybody. Have a beautiful week. And I look forward to hearing all your success stories as you move forward in this new life. Lots of love. Om Shanti.